Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is time for part 3 of the monthly Q&A. A lot of questions this month. There's always a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions I really wanted to answer this month.
Yep.
Which is great to see. Hopefully same thing happens next month. But anyway, a lot of questions to get through. Probably shouldn't waffle on too much more. Have you been going with part 1 and part 2, Tim? You're worn out?
No, I'm not worn out yet. I'm still in question answering mode. So
bring on part 4 then.
Maybe. We'll
but
see.
Before that, today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. All right, first question here from X-Ray. Just all in capitals, so I thought it deserved that. Do you think using multiple monitors on an Nvidia GPU could potentially extend the driver overhead issues on lower-end hardware compared to using multiple monitors on Radeon GPU? Don't think so. If I understand why we're seeing it and how it works, I don't believe multiple monitors would exacerbate the driver overhead, let's call it. Due to the lack of dedicated hardware scheduling. Might be worth looking into, but I don't think there'll be much to be seen there.
Yeah, I think running the monitors is a very low intensity task. It's mostly done in the display engine of the GPU. It's not like it's smashing the shader units and the geometry units to run your desktop.
Or even multi-monitor games. All that does is that's just more pixels to render.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, we have seen in the past when running multiple monitors, sometimes the GPU can run at a slightly different clock speed, depending on how many monitors you have and how many, the resolution of the monitors and so on. It might need to bump up an idle state from like a really low state to slightly above. I assume that's related to the display engine needing a bit more,
makes sense,
bit more oomph to run those things, and they try and optimize that as much as they can over time. But yeah, I would be surprised if this was going to affect the driver overhead issue. Seems very separate.
All right, next question here. Will there be CPU upgrades past Alder Lake on Z690 with DDR4? Did you bring that crystal ball? No, we've already discussed that. You haven't.
Yeah, no crystal ball this month. But I think there were rumors that the next generation platform will also support DDR4. But again, those are just rumors. So.
Well, if you had to ask me, I'd say there's absolutely no chance it won't. Have we seen an instance where they brought in like a newer DDR memory standard and the generation that followed after didn't support it?
I think if it's on the same motherboard, if it supports LGA 1700.
I think I'm not overlooking something obvious, but I'm pretty sure that's never happened before. Could be setting myself up there.
It'd cause a lot of headaches if you had a CPU that used the same socket on the same chipset, but then half like the motherboards didn't work.
Look, I'm going to say there's no chance that's going to happen. The only sort of leak we have on that is from Moore's Law is Dead. So Tom over there, he got confirmation, I believe, that 13th gen will work just fine with DDR4, which to me would always be the expectation. So it's nice to have, I guess, some sort of confirmation there from one of the guys that gets pretty good leaked information. But yeah, we certainly can't guarantee anything. We don't have any official information, but it would definitely be my expectation that would be the case.
What would be the best CPU for a high-end, small form factor Mini-ITX build right now? Limited air cooler clearance being a factor, would you go with a, say, 5700G, 5800X, 5900X, 12600K? Would the 12600K be possible to cool without major downclocking/undervolting?
Okay, well, I'll start by answering the last part of that question. So the 12600K is easier to cool than like a 5900X. Very similar to like the 5800X, maybe even a bit easier to cool than the 5800X, but comparable. So the 12600K, again, we've talked about this so many times, and this is the problem with Intel leading with, I know they sampled the Core i5 part, but a lot of people focused on the Core i9 because it's the fastest part, and the Core i9 is disgusting on power usage and therefore difficult to cool. Not the case for the Core i7 and i5 models. So the 12600K is relatively easy to cool. Anything that can handle like a 5600X or a 5800X is going to work just fine on that part.
Yep.
So now that we've established that is a perfectly viable CPU for an ITX build, which one would be more suitable for a high-end ITX build? I guess it depends on what you're doing with the ITX build, because you can get close to like 5900X performance with a 12600K from memory, or at least the 5800X. I mean, they're wildly different in terms of pricing. So, I mean, if it's a high-end build, you'd go for the 5900X over the 5800X just because it's a higher-end CPU with 4 more cores. And you should be able to cool the 5900X within a Mini-ITX form factor. But out of all those CPUs, I reckon like the 12600K is probably one of the most compelling options there. Yep. But having said that, I haven't really looked at what Z690 Mini-ITX motherboards there are, and other prices absolutely absurd.
Yeah, and it depends as well on the use case for your system. Like, is this a gaming build or is this a production workload type build? In which case you buy 5900X because it's got more cores, but then if it's gaming, you might sway more to the Intel stuff.
Depends on the production as well. Like 12600K has really strong single core performance. I think the 5700G would be out of the question for me if you've got an integrated graphics solution, because it has nothing to offer over the other chips. So the 5700G is only really if you need to use integrated graphics, and that's just such a niche product, that one, because go watch my review basically. So it's really 5900X. Well, actually, it's not even that, because I'm not sure it's in the same price range.
Yeah, you get a 12700K instead of 5900X anyway.
Yeah. Do you think AMD will still be the ones on top over the next year with the release of Zen 3D with Vcache and possible clock speed improvements so they become level with Intel in gaming, and the reduction in price of AM4 due to DDR4 and less expensive motherboards and CPUs at the start of LGA 1700's life? LGA 1700 platform with Alder Lake may also be more expensive due to prices of DDR5.
There's multiple angles to take with this, isn't there? Because there's obviously the performance angle, in which, I think most people would expect Zen 3D with Vcache should be competitive with Alder Lake. But then pricing is also a factor. If AMD comes out and the 5800X is back up to $400, and then Intel is selling, their CPUs for less, and the performance is roughly the same there, then AMD might be at a performance per dollar disadvantage, especially if something like a 5800X is cut in price relative to the Vcache parts. So then you start having all these considerations of, it's faster or equivalent, but it's more expensive. So there's a lot of things going on there, and I think it should be a highly competitive landscape for sure.
Yeah, and the DDR5 memory thing is irrelevant because it supports DDR4. We recommend that. There's really no reason to get DDR5, especially at this point in time. So that's not an issue. All right, Tim, what is the difference between typical gaming versus production GPUs? So, Radeon Pro, Quattro, all that sort of stuff. No, they don't actually have Quattro anymore.
They just got rid of the Quattro brand, didn't they?
Like the A4000, A6000. So, anyway, for homework, is there any reason to pay the large price premiums for workstation cards?
No.
Yeah.
Is the answer to that? No.
No. Yeah. Especially if you're just doing like general applications that run just fine on a GeForce card, or gaming, of course.
So the main advantage to getting a production GPU like these Radeon Pro GPUs is for the certified drivers. So that's really why pros use those cards. And the reason that you want certified drivers is that when time is money, you want someone to tell you that something is just going to work. So the whole reason around the certified drivers is AMD and Nvidia say, oh, so you're using AutoCAD? We know for a fact that this GPU works with this application. So when you're buying, you don't need to mess around with drivers. It's certified, and that's part of the whole process. So that's part of why they're more expensive, because they do the certification for you to make sure that it's all compatible. And as a pro, in some fields, that is very advantageous. You just want your stuff to work. You don't want to be rendering your multi-million-dollar film on your workstation and then suddenly the driver doesn't work, or you update to a new driver and it doesn't work. Yeah. So you need that certification, and that's why they cost more money. But for a lot of people, gaming GPUs work just fine. So if you're more of a prosumer or a small business, then you can get away just fine using even RTX 3090s for your production work and not needing to worry about the certified pro drivers, because they still run the same applications. They just don't have, maybe they don't have the same optimizations, maybe they don't have the same certification to know that they work, but if you're willing to work around that, then that's fine.
Yeah, there's a little bit more emphasis on stability as well.
Absolutely. Like they run at a lower clock speed.
Yep.
They're tend to be more around the more efficient point. And I think with like your A4000 GPU, it seems to be a better binned version of what they would put into
I'd say so.
The
it's hard to know
GPU
for sure because we can't do like for like comparisons,
Yes.
but that does appear to be the case.
So yes, if you make hundreds of thousands of dollars from your projects and you're going to have big beefy workstations, then pro GPUs are for you. But other than that, they're pretty niche products. So gaming GPUs are just fine.
All right, Tim. Did you bring your crystal ball?
Oh, I didn't bring the crystal ball.
Ooh.
Damn.
Okay, well, we'll see how this goes then. What can we expect from gaming monitors in 2022? Further mini LED displays, or is it more just higher refresh rates?
So it would have benefited being able to look into the crystal ball and really give a good. But I'm just going to have to
take this answer with a grain of salt.
I know it's not going to be as good now. Luckily, it looks like there will be a few more mini LED displays. Don't need to look into the crystal ball for this because some of them have been announced.
Okay,
so that's good. So there's an AOC monitor coming out that's a 1440p HDR monitor with, I think, 500-ish mini LED zones, which should be a good, cheaper version. It's not cheap, but it's not $3,000. So from that perspective, it's cheaper.
It's not RTX 3090 cheap.
So I'm expecting more of that. And then, obviously improving resolution and refresh rates are always a goal of different monitors. But there's a lot of room for these things to improve. Over the last year, we've seen the price of 1440p, sort of your bang for buck monitors, fall from, I think the M27Q launched at like 360 US and is now on sale for Black Friday at like 280 US. So if that trend continues, then 1080p is going to quickly find itself irrelevant and pushed out of the market. So that may continue to happen next year. And then, I'd expect a whole range of new sort of technologies and things to gradually improve in all areas. So refresh rates, resolution, HDR should be a fairly typical year, I'd think.
All right, Tim, this looks like it might be a job for you, I reckon.
Okay.
I'm handballing this one off to you and your expertise. Will you be testing out NVIDIA Image Scaler soon with FSR and DLSS? Also, I've seen that it has some issues with this new technology. It seems to cause a decrease in performance at native resolution when enabled by default globally via the NVIDIA control panel. The issue seems to stem from its sharpening filter, where even if its value is at 0%, you can experience a 5 to 6% performance penalty. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I've heard that before. The best quality sharpening filter that NVIDIA provides is quite performance intensive if you enable it in, their freestyle tools. I think they've got two different sharpening filters. One I think is called Sharpen Plus, and that is quite a performance intensive filter, relatively speaking. I mean, 5% is not crazy, but
no,
it's for that sort of effect is quite large. I am going to test this at some point. One of the reasons why I haven't got around to it just yet is there's kind of two versions of the image scaler. There's the driver-based version, which is applied at the end of the game and just does its work, sharpens, upscales. And then there's the SDK version, which is meant to be implemented more like FSR in the middle of the game pipeline. So that would be potentially before your post-process effects and UI are applied. And I kind of wanted to compare both approaches, but obviously we need a couple of decent games that would use the SDK version before we can look into that in depth. But I'm not surprised that there is a performance penalty because it is doing something. So you can't just expect to enable an effect and it to be free.
There's some driver overhead there.
Even FSR isn't free. Like it does cause a couple of % performance drop versus not using it. So,
which you can only see when you're not getting the benefit of using it.
Yeah, that's right. So you kind of have to run at a lower resolution and not bother upscaling it using these sort of more advanced techniques. So we'll explore that. I don't think the 5% performance penalty would be too much of an issue if you're already gaining performance from the downscaling and then upscaling process. So we'll test all of that though.
You'll test all of that.
Yes, I will do it. You will be doing something else.
I'll do anything else. Okay, question here. I keep hearing about how much better NVENC is than the AMD equivalent. Any interest in actually testing it, especially since Steve has previously said that there's very little difference to his eyes. My eyes that can't pick out ray tracing half the time and Tim picks on me. Anyway, yeah, well, I'll be honest, not that much interest from really getting into the nitty gritty and doing all side-by-side comparisons and working out which one's better and this and that. Basically, I do record gameplay and I do game on GeForce and Radeon GPUs. I like to swap around a bit to test the experience with both. And at a relatively high bit rate, I can't tell the difference. They're both very good as far as I can tell. There's certainly not one that jumps out at you as being worse. However, after making those sort of comments on videos, people have basically said the big problem with AMD's encoder, or however they do it, is that at lower bit rates, the file sizes are significantly larger. And I have sort of dialed down the bit rates a bit. That does seem to be the case, but I'm not sure how accurate that is.
So you're saying like at lower bit rates, AMD's quality isn't there?
No, I'm not even sure. Well, I'm not sure if that was the claim. It's that the actual file sizes are much bigger.
Oh, so if you're using like constant quality where you choose like 22 or 20 or whatever. Yeah.
There's some compression that Nvidia does that doesn't hurt image quality much, but results in much less disk space being required. I believe that is the criticism.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what, there's channels like EPOS Vox, for example, that go into all the streaming stuff because they're more experts in that. I think they've consistently said what you've been saying, like for streaming, which requires lower bit rates, that NVENC is better. But I think mostly what you've been saying as well about at high bit rates is pretty similar to what I've seen especially for, testing video encoding, for example. When you use Premiere, you want to make sure that if you're testing on an Nvidia GPU and an AMD GPU, that the actual video files you get are very much the same. And that tends to be the case, whether you're using either brand. So, yeah, it's one of those things where we probably could test it. But again, showing side-by-sides when you're looking at compression in a video that itself is compressed on YouTube
That's the other challenge.
Is a challenge. So you need to run it through those tools like VMAF, and they give you an actual score as to how close the video files are to the source or whatever.
Can definitely be done. But basically, there are lots of things that touch on stuff we look into, such as this, for example. We should probably look into, but at the end of the day, it's like, how many things can we look into? And like the amount of time and effort this would need for a proper investigation is significant. And then we haven't, well, at least on my side, haven't got the experience of doing this before. So, these kind of tests, it's great when you can call on, a lot of experience having handled this, because you know what to look out for, how people are using these, how they should be using it, all that sort of stuff. And it's not really stuff that I've spent much time with. So there's definitely other channels that could do, or probably are doing, a much better job of that stuff. So it's a bit unfortunate that I don't have something that I can point to really, or if I do, maybe I've missed something. Link me a video down in the description that helps clear this up a bit. But yeah, there are other channels. So
yeah,
we'll leave it at that. C-Money here with a cracker. Steve, when will you be benchmarking a Dell motherboard? As I would love to see who is worse, Asrock or Dell. Well, I'd say the Dell motherboards be worse, but it's hard to say which company has worse ethics. Not getting any Dell money anytime soon.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, they've blacklisted us straight away from that. Yeah. I want to see that video. You should do that. But I guess the issue with Dell is all the proprietary garbage. So you have to
you have to use their power supply.
Yeah.
Dell's so beneath me that I'd never test it. No, seriously, those systems are terrible.
Dell VRM testing.
Let's move on.
I know you don't typically do cooler testing, but what are your thoughts on 120mm AIOs versus cheap tower coolers? Like in Australia, there are multiple small AIOs for almost half the price of a Noctua U12S, but still about 15 to 20% more than the famous Hyper 212, for example. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on cheap? Are we talking about, I know they're more affordable, there are good quality, say 120mm or 140mm AIO radiators, and there's very cheap, nasty from sort of lesser known brands or no name brands. So a few different ways to answer that one, I suppose. Compared to air coolers, there's obviously very premium, very expensive air coolers that do cost more, but it sort of becomes an apples to oranges comparison there. I guess you've got to separate why it is that you'd want an AIO and why it is that you'd want a tower cooler maybe.
Yeah.
There's a few different ways you could go about this. So some of the drawbacks of the AIO stuff with any of them is obviously stuff like pump noise and then pump failure, which then basically at that point they're ruined. And pumps can fail just because the motor burns out, or because the coolant goes bad and clogs up the system and then the motor burns out, or it just gets stuck and can't actually work anymore. And my experience with the cheaper, lesser known brands, and even some of the cheaper models from like Cooler Master and brands like that, is they generally don't last that long, couple of years, and you start running into pump issues, whether the pump gets really loud or, you know, the coolant goes bad or whatever. I mean, obviously we've had them around for a long time now, so they are getting better and better. So my experience from 4 or 5 years ago may not necessarily apply to today. And the reason I guess you would go a 120 millimeter is to, well, as they sort of allude to here, save on money or space saving. So if it's a space saving thing, I guess the money equation's removed and you just get a good quality one from one of the more known brands. And if you're really just trying to do cooling on a budget, a cheap AIO or
I think like a lot of the air coolers, especially in those budget categories, have gotten better over time to the point where I guess there was a period where it really felt like AIOs were the way to go because the tower coolers were either like the very expensive Noctua ones and then kind of not much in that middle. Whereas these days there's a lot of good options, and I certainly don't think noise, for example, would be a reason to go AIO anymore either, considering there's, again, lots of good quality low noise coolers that are available.
I think so if you're looking at like, you know, the Noctua air coolers that are obviously more expensive, they're more of a comparison with the 240 mil AIOs, the more expensive ones, and then which one performs better, and then there's cons and pros to either one. There's neither option is outright better than the other. It depends on your preferences there. With the cheaper stuff, honestly, I'd avoid those smaller, cheaper units, especially in an ATX case. I think I would just go for the air cooler because thermals aren't going to be significantly different. How much overclocking you're really doing, all that sort of stuff factors into it. But I think at the lower end, I'd definitely be going with the air cooler. And if I was going to go with an AIO, I'd sort of stretch the budget to get those 240 or larger versions. But yeah, it'd be an interesting comparison to do. But obviously, I don't have that much data to pull on because, as you say, we don't do a cooler review. So it's really going to depend on what tower style coolers available at what price and all that sort of stuff. But obviously, with the tower coolers, they're not going to leak. And they're not going to have pump failure where the whole thing has to be thrown out. Worst case, the fan breaks and you can stick on most of them basically on any other fan. With the Noctuas, you could just reuse the clips and you could temporarily take a case fan out, whack it on the cooler, and your system keeps going till you can get another case fan. So I much prefer them at the more budget-oriented systems. With Z690 being so expensive, with so many PCIe lanes, among other things, and AMD being competitive, okay, do you think Intel will allow overclocking on lower-end chipsets now? I'm hoping for, say, B660 with OC, but with less PCIe 4.0 and more PCIe 3.0 lanes instead, fewer USB ports, etc. So they opened up memory overclocking, didn't they, on B560, but not CPU overclocking.
I don't think they will.
I don't think they will either.
I think my reasoning is that Intel will still be producing, the expectation is they will still be producing locked CPUs. Mm-hmm. And Intel has always sort of said that the K SKUs, you're meant to pair those with Z690, and the locked processors, you're meant to use like the H and B series boards for those. Now, of course, you can mix and match there, but generally the design point is, you know, your Core i5 12400 would be designed for a B660 motherboard. So if it's locked and then the board's locked, it's not a
I think if
issue.
Intel was really struggling to be relevant and competitive, like they were with 11th gen, then maybe they would start to, because 11th gen was the first step to memory overclocking to try and make the platform a bit more. Was it 11th gen or was it 10th gen? I think it was 11th.
11th gen's when they unlocked the memory overclocking.
Yeah, cool, I got that right. So anyway, if they were in that same sort of position where they were quite a ways behind, then maybe they would start to open up on more and more things, which always makes it difficult for them when they want to take things away. All right, gonna hit pause or maybe end there. I don't know if we've got enough questions for maybe a part 4. I don't know. We'll see how we go, see how the editing process goes. But it feels like we've been answering questions for hours now. In fact, We have been. So
Yeah.
that's probably why it feels like it. Voice is getting a bit rusty. But yeah, thank you to everyone who asked a question this month. We had a lot of good ones. Also, thank you to the people who upvote the good ones, because that makes our job a lot easier, because we can see what you guys want us to talk about and address. So always helpful. But other than that, thank you for watching, 20% Club and all that. And thank you to our Patreon and Floatplane members. And if you'd like to become a Patreon or Floatplane member, links are in the video description. You get access to our monthly live stream. Tim and I get together just as we are now. And we read the chat thing, and Tim usually reads him out for me because he's closer to the screen, not because of my eyesight. And it's a lot of fun. But we also have Discord where, again, Tim and I are in there typing away to you guys and talking about things. Behind the scenes content, Q&As, a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. But if not, perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video.
I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.